8 years. 3,000 days of self-imposed exile, a world that had shrunk from infinite possibilities to four-bedroom walls and the safety of knowing exactly where every exit was located. When Sarah Collins walked onto the America's Got Talent stage, she wasn't just facing 3,400 strangers, she was facing the biggest fear of her life. Simon Cowell thought he was about to witness another nervous contestant overcome stage fright. He had no idea he was about to see someone literally fight for their freedom, one note at a time. What happened next would challenge everything anyone thought they knew about courage, about performance, about what it means to be trapped by your own mind. When Sarah closed her eyes and began to sing, when her voice filled that massive theater despite her terror, it became clear that this wasn't just about overcoming stage fright. This was about a woman reclaiming her life from a disease that had stolen everything: her career, her social connections, her ability to exist in the world beyond her front door. And Simon Cowell, witnessing the most courageous performance of his career, would discover that sometimes the greatest talent isn't technical skill. It's the strength to keep going when everything inside you is telling you to stop. Let me take you back to the moments before Sarah Collins proved that the bravest performances happen when you sing despite the fear, not because of the absence of it. It was Friday evening at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, and America's Got Talent was in the middle of what would become its most emotionally challenging season yet. The familiar energy buzzed through the venue. 3,400 audience members filling every seat, their excitement and anticipation creating the kind of crowd noise that most performers fed off of. But that would be Sarah's worst nightmare. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table in his signature black t-shirt and perfectly tailored blazer, but tonight his expression carried more curiosity than usual. The producers had briefed him about this particular contestant in terms that were unprecedented. They'd explained that simply getting her to the theater had been a logistical and emotional achievement that rivaled any performance they'd ever facilitated. Sofia Vergara was unusually quiet, having been moved to tears during the pre-show briefing about Sarah's condition. Heidi Klum and Howie Mandel were both subdued, understanding that they were about to witness something that transcended normal entertainment parameters. Terry Crews had spent extra time preparing for this introduction, knowing that his usual high energy might need to be tempered for someone dealing with severe anxiety. The evening had already delivered several memorable performances, but everyone involved in the production understood that what was about to happen would be different. This wasn't about talent in the traditional sense. This was about human courage in its rawest form. Backstage, Sarah Collins sat in the contestant waiting area, but sitting was a generous description of what she was doing. She was curled into the smallest possible version of herself, her arms wrapped around her knees, her breathing carefully controlled through techniques she'd learned in 8 years of therapy that had helped manage her condition but never cured it. Beside her sat her husband, Tom Collins, the only person in the world who had witnessed the full scope of Sarah's struggle, who understood that getting her to this theater represented the kind of victory that most people would never fully comprehend. "How are you doing, love?" Tom asked quietly, though he could see the answer in every line of her body, in the way she couldn't stop checking and rechecking the exits, in the way her hands trembled despite the medication she'd taken. "I can't do this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible even to him. "There are too many people. It's too big. I can't breathe properly." Tom had heard these words hundreds of times over the past 8 years, had watched agoraphobia steal his wife piece by piece until the confident, outgoing singer he'd married had disappeared into a woman who couldn't walk to the mailbox without panic attacks. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," he said gently, the same words he'd been saying for years. "But Sarah, remember why we're here. Remember what you told me last month." Sarah lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time since they'd arrived at the theater. What she'd told him last month, during one of her rare moments of clarity between panic attacks, was that she was tired of being afraid, tired of letting agoraphobia win, tired of having this incredible voice that no one would ever hear because she couldn't get past her front door. "I want to sing again," she had said, crying in their bedroom after watching an AGT audition on television. "I want to share my music with people again. I want to remember who I was before the fear took over." The journey to this moment had begun 8 years ago with what should have been the happiest day of Sarah's life. She had been performing at a local venue, building a following as a singer-songwriter, when a fire broke out in the crowded club. The stampede that followed had left her physically unharmed, but psychologically shattered. The panic attack she'd experienced while trapped in that crowd had been so severe that her brain had categorized all crowded spaces as mortal threats. What started as reasonable caution about large gatherings had gradually expanded into a fear of smaller groups, then of leaving her neighborhood, then of leaving her house, until finally Sarah's safe space had contracted to just her bedroom, where she could control every variable and know that escape was always possible. "Sarah Collins," called Maria, one of the production assistants, her voice unusually gentle. The entire AGT staff had been briefed on Sarah's condition, and everyone understood that they were facilitating something unprecedented. Sarah's breathing immediately became rapid and shallow. "I can't. Tom, I can't do this. There are too many people out there." Tom knelt beside his wife's chair, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, look at me. You've been practicing for months. You know this song by heart. You know that when you sing, everything else disappears. But what if I have a panic attack on stage? What if I freeze? What if—" "Then we deal with it," Tom interrupted gently. "But what if you don't? What if you get up there and remember that you're not just someone with agoraphobia? What if you remember that you're Sarah Collins, one of the most talented singers I've ever heard?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her internal battle visible in every expression that crossed her face. "Will you stay where I can see you?" she asked finally. "I'll be right in the wings, the whole time. If you need to stop, just look at me and we'll leave. No questions asked. And if I can't make it through the whole song, then you'll have tried, which is more than you've been able to do for 8 years. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs shaky but supporting her weight. She smoothed down the simple navy blue dress that Tom had helped her choose. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw extra attention, just something that made her feel like herself. "I'm going to close my eyes," she said quietly. "I'm going to pretend I'm in our bedroom, singing just for you like I do every night." "That sounds perfect, love," Terry Crew's voice carried across the theater with unusual gentleness. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah Collins." The curtain rose, and Sarah began the longest walk of her life. The audience's reaction was immediate and concerning. Even from a distance, Sarah's distress was visible. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone navigating a minefield. Her eyes darted constantly to the exits. Her breathing was visibly labored, and by the time she reached center stage, she was clearly in the early stages of a panic attack. Simon leaned forward, his expression shifting from curiosity to genuine concern. He had never seen a contestant in such obvious psychological distress, and he wasn't sure whether the compassionate thing was to let her continue or to end this before it became traumatic. "Good evening," Terry said softly, approaching Sarah with the kind of careful movement one would use around a frightened animal. Sarah looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, then immediately turned to find Tom in the wings. Seeing him there, exactly where he'd promised to be, gave her just enough stability to respond. "Good evening," she whispered, her voice so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sarah Collins." Each word seemed to require enormous effort. "And where are you from, Sarah?" "Denver, Colorado." Her eyes were still darting around the theater, cataloging the size of the crowd, the distance to the exits, the impossibility of quick escape. "So what brings you to AGT tonight?" Sarah was quiet for so long that everyone began to wonder if she would be able to answer at all. Then, in a voice that was barely audible but carried clearly in the silent theater, she spoke. "I haven't been able to leave my house for 8 years. I have agoraphobia, which means I'm terrified of crowds, of open spaces, of anywhere I can't easily escape from. But I used to be a singer, and I miss it so much that I finally decided the pain of staying the same was worse than the pain of trying to change. The audience, which had been murmuring with concern, fell completely silent. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing someone's most private struggle made public. "And what are you going to sing for us tonight?" Terry asked gently. "I'm going to sing Brave by Sarah Bareilles," Sarah replied, her voice getting slightly stronger. "Because that's what I'm trying to be, brave." Simon found himself studying Sarah with a mixture of admiration and concern. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't just about to judge a vocal performance, he was about to witness an act of courage that transcended anything he'd seen in 20 years of entertainment. "All right, Sarah," Terry said, stepping back carefully. "Take your time. The stage is yours." Sarah stood at center stage, looking out at 3,400 faces staring back at her, and for a moment it seemed like she might bolt. Her breathing became rapid. Her hands shook visibly, and she took several steps backward toward the wings where Tom waited. Then she stopped, closed her eyes tightly, and spoke directly to the audience. "I'm going to close my eyes while I sing," she said, her voice carrying more clearly now. "Not because I don't want to see you, but because if I look at how many of you there are, I won't be able to do this. So I'm going to sing like I'm alone in my bedroom, the way I've been singing for 8 years, just for myself and my husband." The honesty in her voice, the vulnerability of the moment, created a connection with the audience that was immediate and profound. "If you could just be very quiet, I think I can do this." The theater fell into a silence so complete that the sound of the air conditioning seemed loud. 3,400 people held their breath, understanding that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The opening notes of Brave began to play, and Sarah, with her eyes still tightly closed, began to sing. What emerged from her lips was nothing short of miraculous. Despite her terror, despite her shaking hands and rapid breathing, despite the fact that she was facing her worst fear in front of millions of viewers, Sarah's voice was pure, powerful, and absolutely perfect. You can be amazing, you can turn a phrase into a weapon or a drug, you can be the outcast or be the backlash of somebody's lack of love, or you can start speaking up. Simon's mouth fell open. This wasn't just good singing. This was extraordinary talent emerging from extraordinary circumstances. Sarah's voice carried emotional weight that seemed impossible, the kind of authenticity that couldn't be taught or manufactured. Nothing's going to hurt you the way that words do when they settle neath your skin, kept on the inside and no sunlight, sometimes a shadow wins. As Sarah continued to sing, something remarkable was happening. With her eyes closed, transported by the music and the familiarity of a song she'd sung hundreds of times in the safety of her bedroom, her stage presence began to emerge. Her posture straightened, her voice grew stronger, and she began to move slightly with the rhythm. "But I want to see you be brave. I want to see you be brave." The audience was transfixed. They weren't just hearing a beautiful voice. They were witnessing transformation in real time, watching someone literally sing their way out of paralyzing fear. Sophia was crying openly, recognizing the courage it took for Sarah to be standing on that stage at all. Heidi was leaning forward, completely absorbed in both the technical excellence and emotional power of the performance. Howie was unusually still, understanding that he was witnessing something that transcended entertainment. But it was Simon's reaction that was most profound. This man who had built his career on technical critique and commercial viability was watching someone use music exactly as it was meant to be used, as therapy, as liberation, as a bridge between isolation and connection. Say what you want to say and let the words fall out. Honestly, I want to see you be brave with what you want to say and let the words fall out. Honestly, I want to see you be brave. As Sarah reached the climactic chorus, her voice soared through the theater with a power that seemed to surprise even her. This wasn't just someone overcoming stage fright. This was an artist reclaiming her instrument after years of enforced silence. "I want to see you be brave. I want to see you be brave." The final notes hung in the air like a prayer, and for several seconds the Dolby Theater remained in complete silence. Sarah kept her eyes closed, afraid that opening them would shatter whatever spell had allowed her to complete the performance. Then the applause began, but it was unlike any applause in AGT history. It wasn't just appreciation for a good performance, it was recognition of courage, celebration of triumph over adversity, acknowledgement of witnessing something genuinely transformative. But Sarah didn't hear the applause at first because she was still standing with her eyes closed, trying to process what she had just accomplished. "Sarah," Terry said gently, approaching her carefully. "Sarah, you can open your eyes now." Sarah opened her eyes slowly, and when she saw the standing ovation, when she realized that 3,400 people were celebrating not just her voice but her courage, she began to cry. Not tears of panic or fear, but tears of relief, of accomplishment, of remembering what it felt like to connect with people through music. The judges were all standing as well, but it was Simon who spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah," he said, and had to pause to collect himself. "I need you to understand what just happened here." Sarah looked at him, still processing the magnitude of what she had just done. "You didn't just sing a song tonight. You didn't just overcome stage fright. You just proved something that I think everyone in this theater needed to see." Simon's voice was carrying more emotion than anyone had ever heard from him in 20 years of judging. "You proved that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and choosing to do what matters to you anyway. You proved that talent doesn't disappear just because life gets difficult. And you proved that sometimes the most powerful performances come from the most personal struggles." The audience was hanging on every word, understanding that Simon was articulating something profound about the nature of courage and art. "Sarah, for 8 years, agoraphobia told you that you couldn't leave your house, that you couldn't face crowds, that you couldn't share your gift with the world. Tonight, you proved that voice wrong. You stood on this stage in front of the largest audience of your life, and you sang beautifully." Simon stepped closer to the stage, his expression intense with conviction. "But more than that, you reminded all of us that our limitations don't define us. Our responses to those limitations define us, and your response was to fight back with music, with courage, with the determination to not let fear win." Sarah was crying openly now, but they were tears of joy, mixed with relief, mixed with pride in what she had just accomplished. "Thank you," she whispered into her microphone. "Thank you for being so quiet, for letting me pretend I was alone. Thank you for making this possible." Simon looked at his fellow judges, then back at Sarah. "Sarah Collins, what you just did deserves more than just praise. It deserves recognition that will help other people understand that they can face their fears too, that they can reclaim what mental illness has taken from them." He walked to his golden buzzer with absolute conviction. "Sarah, you came here tonight not just to sing, but to prove to yourself that you could. You succeeded beyond anything you probably imagined, and now we want to help you continue that journey." Simon slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, but this time it felt like liberation made visible. It was the moment when 8 years of self-imposed exile ended, when agoraphobia lost its power, when a woman reclaimed her right to exist fully in the world. Through all the falling gold, Sarah looked directly at Tom in the wings and mouthed the words, "I did it." He was crying as hard as she was, understanding that this wasn't just about a performance. This was about his wife coming back to life. Terry Crews approached Sarah with tears in his own eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Collins, proving that brave isn't the absence of fear, it's singing through it." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when the immediate celebration calmed and Sarah was able to speak again. "For 8 years," she said to the audience, "I let fear make all my decisions. I let it decide where I could go, who I could see, what I could do. Tonight, for the first time in 8 years, I made a decision based on love instead of fear. I chose to love music more than I feared crowds." She paused, looking out at the faces that had seemed so terrifying when she first walked onto the stage, but now looked like friends. If you're watching this and you're struggling with anxiety, with depression, with any mental illness that's telling you that you can't do something, please don't listen to that voice. Please listen to the voice that tells you what you love, what matters to you, what's worth fighting for, because that voice is stronger than fear, even when it doesn't feel like it. 3 months later, Sarah Collins won America's Got Talent, becoming the first contestant with a documented anxiety disorder to take the title. Her victory performance was an original song called Beyond the Walls, which became an anthem for people struggling with mental health issues worldwide. But the numbers and recognition weren't the real story. The real story was in the thousands of messages Sarah received from people with agoraphobia, social anxiety, and other conditions who said her performance gave them hope. It was in the therapy programs that began using her story as an example of what recovery could look like. It was in the gradual expansion of Sarah's own world, from her bedroom to her house to her neighborhood, to eventually touring the country, sharing her music and her message. Simon Cowell, deeply moved by what he had witnessed, became a major advocate for mental health awareness in the entertainment industry. He established the Sarah Collins Foundation for Performance Anxiety, providing resources and support for artists struggling with mental health issues. But perhaps Sarah's most important contribution was changing the conversation about what courage looks like. Her story became a case study in therapeutic programs, proving that recovery isn't about the absence of symptoms. It's about learning to function despite them, to pursue what matters to you, even when your brain is telling you it's impossible. 6 months after her AGT victory, Sarah performed her first full concert tour, a series of intimate venues where she created safe spaces for people with anxiety disorders to experience live music. Before each show, she would speak about her journey, normalizing the conversation about mental health and proving that healing is possible. During her performance at Red Rocks Amphitheater, the largest venue she'd ever attempted, Sarah looked out at an audience of 9,500 people and remembered the terror she'd felt facing 3,400 on the AGT stage. 2 years ago, she told the crowd, "I couldn't leave my house. Tonight, I'm here with almost 10,000 of you, and instead of feeling scared, I feel grateful. Grateful for every person who believed I could do this before I believed it myself, grateful for every small step that led to this big stage, and grateful for the reminder that our fears don't have to be permanent." She closed her eyes just like she had on that first night and began to sing Brave, the song that had changed her life by proving that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is simply show up and trust that your love for something is stronger than your fear of it. The lesson Sarah Collins taught the world that night is profound. Courage isn't feeling fearless. Courage is feeling afraid and choosing your dreams over your fears anyway. It's understanding that mental illness might shape your journey, but it doesn't have to determine your destination. Simon Cowell learned that being a judge sometimes means recognizing when someone isn't just performing, they're healing, they're fighting, they're proving to themselves and everyone watching that human beings are capable of extraordinary courage when they have something worth singing for. And Sarah proved that the most powerful performances aren't always technically perfect. They're authentically brave, courageously vulnerable, and honest about the fact that sometimes the greatest victory is simply showing up when everything inside you is telling you to run away. The golden confetti from that night has been swept away, but the golden moment it represented, when a woman who hadn't left her house in 8 years sang her way back into the world, when fear became fuel for courage, when isolation became connection, that moment continues to inspire, to heal, and to prove that our limitations are often just challenges waiting for us to find the strength to overcome them. In the end, Sarah Collins didn't just sing a song, she sang herself back to life, back into the world, back into the belief that she was bigger than her fears and stronger than her limitations, and in doing so, she gave that same gift to everyone who watched her prove that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close your eyes and sing anyway.